And with that, I want to welcome in our next speaker. We're so excited to have Linda Ryden. Linda Ryden is the creator of the Peace of Mind program, a cutting-edge combination of mindfulness, social and emotional learning, neuroscience, and conflict resolution. Linda is the author of the Peace of Mind curriculum series and 4 children's books published by the Tilbury House. As the full-time peace teacher at Lafayette Elementary School, a public school in Washington, D.C., she teaches peace classes to more than 700 children every week. In the talk that's upcoming, Linda Ryden will share how learning mindfulness skills and simple neuroscience have helped her students to take care of their emotions, to be more compassionate toward others, learn to manage conflicts peacefully, and investigate their own implicit bias. Welcome in, Linda. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you.
Well, listen, I will be listening as intently as I was before, taking copious notes. Let me tell you, remind you again, I have 2 8-year-olds upstairs who are going into 3rd grade. And I know that when they return to school, they need teachers who, and parents like me who can help to guide them emotionally, who can help them to process all that they're experiencing. And I need education in this area. So I look forward to it. I turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us, and we'll all listen.
Thank you, Casey. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you today and so honored to be in the company of so many amazing educators. And one of my heroes, Reverend Barber. It just means so much to me to have this opportunity to share some thoughts with all of you, teacher to teacher. Now, I imagine that when some of you saw the description of my talk and saw the word mindfulness, you rolled your eyes. And I get it. And to be honest, I used to feel the same way. But I'm guessing that what you've heard about mindfulness doesn't quite capture what it looks like in my classroom. So I'd like to tell you about what I've seen in my own classroom over the last 17 years in a public elementary school in Washington, D.C. Now, most people know that mindfulness can help you to calm down. That's why I started teaching mindfulness years ago. I was teaching conflict resolution, and I realized that without the skills to help them to calm down, my students were not really able to use the skills that I was teaching them. When I learned about mindfulness and later about neuroscience, I realized that what was missing from my teaching. With mindfulness and neuroscience as the foundation, I'm able to teach about conflict resolution and social emotional learning in a way that's deeper and more effective. And I've seen this work, and it's transformative. It led me to start Peace of Mind, our nonprofit organization, to share our curriculum with other educators. And this is what I normally talk about when I'm asked to talk about my work. But this moment calls for something different. So today, I'd like to talk to you about why I believe that teaching mindfulness is revolutionary. Mindfulness, like I said, is about more than calming down. Many people think that practicing mindfulness means clearing your mind, but it's actually quite the opposite. It's more about metacognition, or thinking about thinking. Through mindfulness practice, we learn about how our mind is always flitting around, trying to find new things to think about. It's like there's a remote control in our brain that changes the channels randomly. We can choose a channel, but our mind might change the channel, and we might not even notice it. This happens to everyone. Mindfulness helps us to get better at noticing what's happening in our minds and get more intentional about what we want to be thinking about. Having the ability to notice what your mind is doing and make a choice about what you want to do is liberating. I'll be talking about this more in detail during a breakout session later this afternoon. The applications of mindfulness to the challenges we face during this pandemic are clear. We can use mindful breathing practices to help us deal with fear and anxiety. We can use metacognition to help us to notice when we're walking around in a fog of worry and make a different choice. These skills have helped my students and me tremendously during the pandemic, in large part because we've been practicing them for years. But today, I want to talk about why I believe that mindfulness can also be an important tool to help us deal with the other pandemic we're facing, the pandemic of systemic racism. Here in Washington, D.C., after 10 weeks of distance learning, schools closed early, right before Memorial Day weekend. And just days later, we experienced a different sort of upheaval. With the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many more Black men and women and trans people at the hands of the police, protesters took to the streets, including some of my current and former students. And I was heartbroken that I couldn't sit with my students in my classroom and talk about what was happening and try to make sense of it together. I'm sure you all know that feeling. Back in February, which seems like years ago now, we had our third annual Black Lives Matter Week of Action at my elementary school. We spent the week celebrating the glorious contributions of Black people to this country, providing powerful counter-stereotypic images and stories. We had challenging conversations about systemic racism and white supremacy with our students and colleagues. But with schools closed now during these protests, my students are scattered. And I'm left to hope that what we learned in peace class will be helpful to them now. So what does any of this have to do with mindfulness? Well, those metacognition skills that I talked about earlier can be used to help us investigate our own thoughts, to uncover and challenge and face our own implicit bias. We all have implicit or unconscious bias. It's passed on from our families and through the culture. Bias against Black people, queer people, immigrants, it's all around us. It's the air that we breathe. And many of us, especially straight, white, cisgender people, are unaware of it. We're not responsible for having this bias. We didn't choose it, but it's our responsibility to reckon with it. And we can only do that if we know that it's there. James Baldwin said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." Through mindfulness practice, we're able to start to see what we're thinking about other people and then wonder, why do I feel this way? Where does this feeling come from? Where did I hear these stories? Is this how I really feel? And what can I do about it? These metacognitive skills are some of the most powerful mindfulness tools we can develop. Mindful awareness can give us a chance to break habits of thought that can free us from generations of painful behavior patterns. They can be a powerful method of breaking down the bias that props up systemic racism. But we can't just teach this. We have to practice it. As educators, we have to look deeply inside ourselves and become aware of the bias and stereotypes that we hold as people who were raised in this culture that might be negatively impacting our students. The majority of public school teachers in the United States are white women. I believe that as a white woman and a teacher, I have an obligation to educate myself about systemic racism, to understand how I as a white person benefit from it, and do my own work on bias and white privilege in order to be worthy of standing in front of my students every day. Now, if talking about bias and racism and white supremacy makes you uncomfortable, that's okay. I'm uncomfortable. It's okay to be uncomfortable. We will make mistakes. I have made lots of mistakes, but we have to do it anyway. Now, as much as I believe in the power of mindfulness and social emotional learning, I do have a concern. I sometimes hear mindfulness programs being pitched as something that can help children control their emotions. Administrators are convinced to incorporate mindfulness programs like my own to help with kids who are out of control or in schools that have serious behavior problems. I sometimes hear people say that mindfulness skills are especially important for those kids. This is dangerous and wrong, and it's not what mindfulness is about. Mindfulness should never be used as behavior management tool or a punishment. Children have a right to all of their emotions, and we should not be telling our students what to do with them. Our children, especially our Black children, have every right to be angry. Mindfulness skills can help all of our children to cope with and heal their emotions, and it can also prepare them to channel that anger into righteous action if that's what they choose. We can't just give our students skills to help them cope with the traumatic effects of racism and inequality. We have to teach them about the systems that are causing this stress, and then equip them and ourselves with the skills and the knowledge and the strength to fight for a better world. In my peace classes, I teach my students about the power of love. Not sugar-coated love, but messy, brave, radical love for ourselves and for our fellow human beings. I teach my students to practice compassion because compassion can be learned, just like hatred. Studies have shown that compassion practices can help to decrease bias and increase empathy. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, believes that the major force fueling the protests in our country right now is simple. It's love. He says, I love. And because I love, I resist. As teachers, we are in a position to shape the minds and hearts of our students, and that is an awesome responsibility. And I believe that we owe it to our students to do our own work first, to be sure that we model and teach the skills that they will need, not to keep our economy moving forward or beat another country in a race for technology, but to create the world that they deserve. A world where every child knows that they're loved and valued and safe exactly as they are. A world in which children of color are not heralded for beating the odds, but a world in which the odds aren't stacked against them. We can do this challenging work together, and our jobs have never been more important. This is hard, long-term, uncomfortable work. And for white people, it's long overdue. I strongly believe that mindfulness practices can help us through this time. Mindfulness practices can offer the self-care that we as educators so desperately need. It can offer us and our students the ability to take care of our emotions, to hold them so they don't become debilitating. It can offer us a tool to examine those thoughts that are holding us back from living in a more peaceful world. It's only a small part of a very large revolution. But I believe that the revolution will be more successful and lasting if it's fought mindfully. And the good news is that mindfulness is available to all of us. It's a tool we can use to do this critical work and to support our children's well-being. I hope that you'll consider learning more about how mindfulness can help you and your students. Please join this mindful revolution. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for this opportunity. I wish you all strength and health and happiness and peace.
Wow. All I can say is wow. Thank you so very much, Linda.
Thank you.
I was trying to take notes, but I was so enthralled, and I can feel the passion and the emotion behind every word that you uttered. I think that you are the teacher that so many of us wish we had at various times throughout our life. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Just hearing you confirms and validates so much of what I think my grandmother was trying to help me understand when I was a kid. And, I was a troublesome kid in school, but she always told me, Casey, your mind is your greatest battlefield. And if you can ever begin to control what you think about, then you can set yourself up for success.
Yeah. She was right.
And so it feels good to hear you say that, and that the mind is never idle, and that metacognition and mindfulness are helpful. But the other thing that jumped out to me, and I want to push you or hear a little bit more about this, is to hear you say that so often we think that mindfulness is important for young people, but that mindfulness and metacognition is helpful for adults.
Oh, yeah.
For all of us right now, especially as we're experiencing what we're going through right now, to take a moment to reflect and grow.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know how I would be getting through this without the mindfulness practice, and it's not a big deal. Like, it doesn't have to. You don't have to go off and do a silent retreat for 3 months. Like, I'm talking about like a couple of minutes every day to take some deep breaths, pay attention to how you're feeling, pay attention to your body, pay attention to your mind. Just the way we pay attention, we exercise, or some of us, but we don't really give that attention to our minds. And sometimes we don't give that attention to our hearts. And it can be really powerful. And as a teacher, I think it's something that helps me every day in the classroom. And it certainly helped me a lot during this distance learning.
And I'm as guilty as I bet many other people are, that cuts against the societal norm right now. We're always absorbing. We're always taking in what's going on in the news, what's on social media, who posted what, and what do I retweet, and what do I comment, and what do I share, and who's reaching out to me, and how do I reach out to them. And the time to shut off for a second and consider yourself, to do some self-care. Wouldn't you say that's important?
It's extremely important because we have to be, as teachers, we have to be able to be a safe place for our kids to land. And if we haven't done our own work, then we're going to be reactive and we're going to be working out our problems on them.
And at a time right now where so many people are taking that long, hard look in the mirror, peeling back the layers and confronting their own personal implicit biases, that mindful practices can help with that. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And once you start to notice it, then it really changes the way you live.
Yeah. And so one last question, I think. I wish my kids attended your school, right? Because we don't see enough teachers around the country who are as knowledgeable or as committed to incorporating mindful practices into their daily instruction. How do you think we, as teacher groups, as teacher advocates, a lot of teachers on this call, some policymakers, those of us who can emphasize, right, or maybe shift policy, how do we get more teachers trained up in both the need for this, the great benefit that comes from it, and how to actually do it? How do you think we can address those?
Yeah, that's really why we started our nonprofit organization, Peace of Mind, because we wanted to help more people do this work. I kind of sort of stumbled into this work in my own classroom, and but I really wanted to share what I've discovered. And there are people all over the country who are teaching mindfulness, and but I really think that we need to have, on a policy level, it needs to be something that's really valued. We've heard a lot about the importance of social emotional learning as we get ready to open the next school year. I think mindfulness is really like the most important thing that kids could be learning right now, and teachers could be using for their self-care. So we have a lot of information on our website. It's teachpeaceofmind.org. There are great organizations like Mindful Schools in California, which train teachers in their own personal mindfulness practice, which is extremely important. And there's a group called the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully that's trying to link up teachers all over the country who are doing this kind of work, sort of, just in their own little classrooms. So we're trying to make, like I said, a mindful revolution to really change the way school is done and to make sure that we're really taking care of the whole child.
Yeah. And of course, if you're on this call today, if you're part of this Zoom and you want to learn some more about mindfulness today, I believe, Linda, you're hosting one of the breakout sessions specifically around this topic.
Yep. We're going to be talking about mindfulness, and we're going to be going into a little more detail about how we use these practices to talk about implicit bias and how we talk about racism with our students.
So I encourage you, as you make your choices, you consider joining Linda's breakout session. Let's give Linda one more big round of applause. So needed, so necessary, so awesome, presented with such passion. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Casey.